Hello, Yates County and beyond. Welcome back to another episode of Invasive Species Friday. Through this short weekly podcast, we at the Yates CCE hope to bring you information about the invasive species you may see around this county. We're hitting the garden with this week's invasive, Asian jumping worm. This may be surprising, but none of the earthworms in New York are native. While most have become naturalized and are considered beneficial in gardens, jumping worms are a severe threat to the environment. Asian jumping worms are, as you may have guessed, native to Eastern and Central Asia. The history of them in the United States is fuzzy, but they were first identified in California in the 1870s and were likely introduced in the soil of imported plants. It wasn't until much more recently that they spread to the Midwest and the Northeast. They were found near Albany, New York in the 1940s, but remained largely in zoos and greenhouses until the 1980s, when they became more prevalent in the suburban areas. It was only in the 2000s that the jumping worm populations exploded in the Northeast. Jumping worms begin to hatch in the spring from poppy seed-sized cocoons, and in 70 to 90 days are fully mature and making their own cocoons, which will overwinter. The adults die off in late fall. Jumping worms are unique earthworms in that they are considered parthenogenic, meaning a single worm can produce viable eggs. The eggs cannot survive being frozen, but are unfortunately well insulated in the cocoons, and we don't often reach the temperatures needed to kill them. Research has shown the cocoons survive temperatures lower than -40 degrees Fahrenheit. In dry soil, juveniles and adults can survive temperatures up to 88 degrees Fahrenheit, but the more moist the soil, the hotter they can handle. In the right conditions, the cocoons and worms can live through temperatures of up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So how can you differentiate a European earthworm from an Asian jumping worm? The biggest clue you have a jumping worm is in the name. When these worms are disturbed or feel threatened, they flail around, flinging their bodies into the air. Sometimes it can look like they're lunging back at the threat, trying to chase it off. This may not be the true intent of the motion, but from personal experience, these guys can be unsettling and even startling if you don't know they're there. The earthworms you're used to are much more laid back with their predictable expand and contract movements. If the jumping worms stop long enough to get a look at them, you may notice the smooth, milky white collar, called a clitellum, near the head of the worm. Nightcrawlers, the earthworms that most people are familiar with, have a raised pink clitellum farther down the body that looks more like a saddle, not fully encircling the body. Jumping worms are also a darker reddish brown and have a large distinct mouth, while European earthworms are pink to brown and have two ends that look very similar. Their castings, or excrement, can be found in dispersed piles, while jumping worms create a uniform layer of casts that resemble coffee grounds. Now let's examine why Asian jumping worms are so much worse than the other non-native earthworms. Asian jumping worms can actually outcompete other earthworm species while feeding on organic material, and their castings alter the texture and composition of the soil. The resulting topsoil is granular and has poor water retention, making it difficult for many plants to grow well. The structure change also increases the amount of nutrients lost to water movement, called leaching. While all earthworms cause environmental harm, jumping worms are such voracious eaters that they strip the vital nutrients from the topsoil even faster than other species, killing plants and increasing erosion. They also leave behind nitrogen, making the resulting soil very nitrogen-rich, which will alter the beneficial bacteria and fungal communities in the soil, leading to cascading effects on the surviving plants and wildlife. In some cases, the nitrogen-rich soil creates the perfect environment for invasive plants to take over an area. Finally, jumping worms may be eaten by birds or other predators, but they reproduce twice as fast as European earthworms, and therefore populations will likely continue to increase despite predation. Care needs to be taken, however, to prevent chickens, especially those used for meat or egg production, from consuming jumping worms, as they bioaccumulate heavy metals found in the soil and can pass the metals on when consumed. Unfortunately, Asian jumping worms do not yet have an effective control method in the United States. There is research being done to test several theories, but so far the results have not been conclusive. Because the adults die off every year, the biggest issue is the eggs. As previously mentioned, the cocoons are tiny, making them nearly impossible to spot in the soil. They are cold and drought resistant and insulate the eggs from most danger. Right now, the best way to handle a jumping worm infestation is by preventing it. If you have an infestation, thoroughly clean all of your tools, shoes, and vehicles before using them in an unaffected area. You don't want to accidentally transport an egg somewhere new. It's also a good idea not to share plants if you have jumping worms. If you do need to move the plant from an infected area, be careful to remove all of the dirt from the roots and rinse the plant thoroughly. If you're buying plants from an area with jumping worms, it's best to buy bare root stock when possible. The cocoons can also be transported in compost and mulch, so be sure to only buy heat-treated compost. It can also be left in the sun for 3 days as long as the compost reaches at least 104 degrees Fahrenheit for all 3 days. Jumping worms are easiest to spot in late August or September when they've reached full length. If you find an Asian jumping worm, try to get a clear picture or video and note where you found it. Seal it in a bag and leave it in the sun or add alcohol or vinegar. Make sure to report the sighting to IMAP Invasives or your local extension office. And with that, we reach the end of this week's episode of Invasive Species Friday. Next Friday, we'll be looking at a mosquito lookalike. Until then, we at the Yates County CCE thank you for tuning in and supporting our fight against invasive species in Yates County.